Welcome to the Parker Avery Group's Talk Retail to Me podcast and new for 2023 video series. In each episode, our consulting professionals cover key retail and CPG topics and offer pragmatic insights that will add value to your operations and initiatives. This is Trisha Gustin. I'm Senior Director of Marketing at the Parker Avery Group, and I have with me today two of our organizational change management leaders. Kathi Toll is a principal and Carrie Habel, who is a senior manager. Both have incredible change management experience, and we're excited to talk about today transformational leadership. But before we get into that, I wanted each Kathi and Carrie to give us a little bit of background, how long you've been with the Parker Avery Group, and kind of your history.
Kathi, you can go first.
Okay, so I have been with the Parker Avery Group. It will be 10 years this November. And I started as a contractor with the firm and worked on and off over a course of 5 or 6 years. And I wasn't a proper Parker Avery employee until 2018. When I joined the firm in the change management practice and have since continued to grow and work with the firm. The growth over the past 10 years, professionally for me, for the firm, and personally has just been incredible to watch. But always after spending lots of years in consulting and vowing never to work for a firm again, what drew me to Parker Avery was the work ethic and the focus that we put on the client. And we do whatever it takes to deliver for the client. And I love that about the firm.
All right. Well, I have been with the firm now for a little over 2 years. Started also, though, as a contractor, which was just a really terrific experience. Fell in love with Parker Avery and, joined 1 year after doing some contract work. My history has been everything from being a beauty advisor behind the Estee Lauder counter way back in the day. I was a planner. I was with Bath and Body Works as a district manager and a regional, and was in the center store operations. So a lot of field, a lot of corporate background. Led the learning and development team. Went to Charming Charlie. Did some consulting on my own, and then here I am. And similar to Kathi, Parker Avery is really, I think what attracted me most is the humbleness of the firm, but also just like we really tailor everything we do to the client. And I think that really stands apart from anybody else. So really proud to be a part of the firm too.
Yeah, it's funny, Carrie. It's hard for me to believe that you're only with Parker Avery for 2 years, because I feel like it's way longer than that in a very good way.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Yeah, no, it's like, of course, to some extent, maybe it seems because of everything that happened with the pandemic and everything, we all lived through that together. And Kathi, I remember the first time I met you was when I first joined the firm and you were on the Dollar Tree project. And you were a contractor then.
Yes.
I feel like a lifetime ago. Great history. And I agree with the way we approach clients is very unique for sure. And everybody in the firm gets the chance to roll up their sleeve and get down into the nitty gritty of client work, because that's what I think makes us so successful, that we deeply understand the challenges that they're going through and then work like hell to fix them. So let's morph over to transformational leadership. So let's talk about, what do we mean by transformational leadership?
So I think first, it's kind of a bit of a debate from organization to organization. Transformation is kind of a little bit of a new buzzword, but it is kind of a new type of change that's also emerged. And it's been a while, but I would say has come more popular since COVID. And just a lot of the digital, transformation and things like that. So, but I would say overall transformational leadership is more of a style of leadership that centers around, people and culture, innovation, workplace autonomy. So it's more of a people first kind of leadership approach. So that's what my definition would be. I don't know if there's an official definition, but Kathi, do you want to share your definition?
Sure. And what's interesting is it's almost sometimes easier to define transformational leadership as what it's not. The opposite, if you will, of transformational leadership is transactional. And it's very much how many of us grew up. It's like, did you make your five sales calls this week? Check. Did you follow up with 3 of the 5? Check. And so on through your checklist. And the boss says, okay, good job. See you next week. Where you're really, the manager was managing transactional activities. The person wasn't interested in tapping into that individual's strength. They weren't interested in trying to shift culture, behavior. They were just about like the day to day, the rudimentaries. And transformational leadership is all about, and that's why it's such a nice fit for Parker Avery, is it's about focusing on a change in an individual, which is the way we approach our change management in the firm. Is we focus on not only organizational change, but we look at the people within the organization because their behaviors need to change in order for the organization. Interestingly enough, it is not a new concept. It was developed in 1978.
Right.
So it's always fun to see when, that buzzword, it has been around and then went away and now we're back and it's the new, everybody's, transformational leadership. It is very, and to Carrie's point, it is a style. It's the way somebody leads versus just focusing on transactional data.
How is it related to change management, or how is it different? To some definitions, I would think change management also pertains to the individual, but usually it's more targeted towards an initiative. So how are they related, and how are they different?
I would say, and I think this is different again based on each organization because there's not a clear path, but I think most organizations are viewing, if we just take change management, it's typically focused on one initiative. So one initiative for the company, whether that's a new system, new software, new org design, but it's like one initiative. So one kind of siloed focus. I think transformation is a more long-term, and it's a portfolio of initiatives versus just kind of one, project or one program. So it takes into consideration kind of the overall transformation of an organization with multiple different initiatives. Change management specifically, typically is focused on one.
And actually ties very closely with our approach on capabilities roadmaps, where it's not you do one and then another. It's a roadmap to get from where you are today to where you really want to be in the future. And it's a series of initiatives. So it sounds like with change management, there are plans for each of those initiatives, but then transformational leadership is more of a broad, here's how your whole entire organization needs to manage all of these initiatives together to get to this future state.
Right. And I think one of the things, I know we're going to focus more on leadership, but I think one of the mistakes that I see companies making is that they are taking each initiative as a silo. And there's not one overarching, let's just call it change or transformation approach that focuses on the people. So when you're going through a new initiative, if you've got, one group focused on, these types of change activities and another, and it's not consistent, it's actually creating confusion. And overall transformation, focuses on people and culture and, kind of just the people first approach. So it confuses people and can actually be pretty detrimental if, companies are actually taking a different approach for multiple different initiatives.
When I hear the phrase change management, I think to me, it's an old school term that's very transactional. I always equate it to any of the Law and Order series. Is, when you're going to watch Law and Order, you'll have a beginning, you're going to have a middle, and you're going to have an end. And it follows a formula. And the change management process, as lots of people know it, is you're following this 8-step, 5-step, 12-step, pick a step methodology formula, and then you're done. And transformation is more about an ongoing, constant learning. We talk about individuals having competencies. Transformational leadership is about the organization having a capability to evolve and to be resilient and adaptive. And if you can have that sitting on top of all of the different change initiatives, whether it's, as Carrie said, we rarely see a client that's just doing a system implementation. They're doing 3 system implementations. They're going to do a reorg. They're changing their comp structure, like all at the same time. And if you have the overarching ability for people to be flexible and resilient, that will take the organization much further than if you're working in these little silos of change practices, so to speak.
So, to your analogy of Law and Order, so transformational leadership might be like the Yellowstone.
It's like Games of Thrones.
Or Game of Thrones, right? Pick your series, right? That has right? I've
You
been watching Yellowstone lately.
Yeah. You don't turn on Games of Thrones and understand what's going on. You're like, what the heck? Is you have to be there. And that's and I think what people have struggled with, and COVID accelerated our ability to adapt, is it's so squishy and you don't know what's going to happen and you're unclear on the next steps. And that is really hard for professional people to deal with. And I think COVID really, as I said, accelerated our capability. And whether we knew it or not, it's like we had to become more resilient. We had to adapt to an just unprecedented circumstance. And that's business today. It continues to be always changing, especially in retail.
I think that's put the spotlight on transformational leadership too, because every leader that I know of has said, my leadership has changed. I have changed.
Yes.
I have to become more empathetic. I have to become more sensitive. I have to be able to adapt to the personal needs of, my employees more than I've ever had to do before. And even the remote work, which we see everywhere, like communication styles have had to change. But overall, I think the great leaders also had to show, especially during COVID, this sense of vulnerability, which maybe that wasn't very common in the past. And so, but it actually really allowed, I think, their teams to be able to relate better, there was a level of trust that maybe wasn't there before. And so I think that has now become a springboard for this, if we tag it as leadership transformation or transformational leadership, those are some of the qualities that I think you have to have now. It wasn't just during that time of COVID. It's like these are lessons learned from leaders that they need to carry with them, and the good ones, have done that.
What's interesting to me with transformational leadership, and it's something both Carrie and I are big believers in, manage people's strengths, identify what they do well, put them in a position to excel, and let's forget, if they're not whiz kids at crunching the numbers, that's okay. They probably have a different skill set, but transformational leadership is focused on not having cookie cutter employees, but finding the individual strengths and having those strengths gel together as a team. So not everybody has to be exactly the same. Right. And again, not a new concept. The whole strength management Gallup's notion has been around for years. And somehow, though, again, we're kind of coming full circle to the fact that people are individuals and they have to be treated as such.
Right. Well, I think it's interesting too, because a lot of organizations are really tailoring their roles now, specifically, Kathi, to what you're saying.
Yeah.
They excel in these particular skills. And so they're rearranging roles. So it's not that cookie cutter approach, and really taking the the needs of the individual into consideration more than they ever have in the past, and making sure that there's meaningful, purposeful work, because that's the key to retention as well.
So speaking of roles, what roles are typically involved as transformation leaders? What roles in a retailer, and what roles should be involved as champions of transformational leadership?
I would say first, it involves every type of leader, but I think it has to start at the top. So, and going back to the earlier conversation, the C-suite and the executives, like that level, they really have been the ones that have needed to kind of set the tone and role model, different types of behaviors, and be more open, almost more of like an intuitive leader versus like a tactical leader. And the communication has changed, where the good transformational leaders aren't top-down communication. They are much more, open and using different types of ways to be able to touch their people. And I think it's changed a lot also from more of a tell environment to an act and a listen. And I really care about you. I want to listen to you. So you see that level of leadership, those good leaders who are really transforming the organizations, they have a connection like they've never had before with their teams. But then I would also say it takes every level. So every level of leader has to start to shift and change and kind of morph into the needs of, the individual and the needs of the business, and change their leadership style.
It's a really interesting question, Tricia, because you asked it and I had my first kind of knee-jerk reaction. And then I put on like my consultant hat. And if a client said, look, we're shifting, we want to shift towards this style, and I had to prioritize the leaders in the organization, how would I do that? Because my first response was, a CFO has got to be a transformational leader, because it's about stimulating intellectual curiosity. So there's really no functional area that doesn't need that. And in the next breath, if I had to think about prioritizing it, is who's influencing customer facing employees? Who has the biggest population? So for instance, is it the field force that's calling on, or the people in the field that are servicing customers? That might be my first place to start. And then the support functions like operations and the people that are sitting sort of behind the scenes would be then the next level. But it's, to Carrie's point, it's not just the C-suite. If it doesn't push down into giving a department manager the empowerment and the ability to lead their teams, it's not going to work. Mm-hmm. It's not going to work.
Do you have any specific examples of how companies have done that well, as far as reaching into your non-executive level and identifying those people that can be part of the transformational leadership team? How are those roles, or those, and it's really people, picked out? And do you have any examples of where that's done well?
There's two that popped into my head, and one isn't necessarily a retailer. It is a distribution center of a retailer. And they started tapping into their frontline teams and said, okay, you brought me a problem, fix it. And they've started to form these little task forces and had people kind of bubble up how they would go about approaching the fix. And it's stuck. Like it's become this little incubator for these really, painfully obvious solutions that if you're working 3 levels above, you don't see. And B, it's given people an incredible sense of like, yeah, that was my idea. Yep, I helped with that. I've also seen other retailers where they've formed leadership councils where they pull from their people from the field, and they have quarterly or monthly sessions with those folks to say, what are we missing? We're sitting here in our ivory tower. What are you seeing? What's working? What isn't? What are some different solutions? And talking with them about, here's what we're thinking for our roadmap. Is that aligning with what you're hearing from the customer? And if it's not, then it's time to reassess that. It's like you might be chasing, the slickest CRM system, and stores are saying, no, that's not what people are looking for right now. We've got that covered. We need to be operationally more efficient because I'm wasting a ton of time here on administrative tasks that I should be focused on working with the client or the customer.
I look at Estee Lauder and I think about, their transformation. So they started Estee Lauder, I think it was in 1946 or 47. Mrs. Estee Lauder started with just a small company and sold $800, I think it was, of merchandise to Saks. And now I think they're at like 18 billion and they have, 25 or more brands. And I think about, I know so many people, Kathi, I'm sure you do with
Yeah.
your background too, that are still with that organization. And what keeps them there is they do have, organizational benefits like, any other big organization. But what they never lost was that sense of family and sense of culture. And they've been able to maintain that in all of those different brands. And, with 60,000 or so employees worldwide, they have been able to continue to maintain this level of loyalty, and it's through their culture and through their leaders. And they have always just focused on people first, whether it's bringing in a new brand. It's like they won't execute anything
Yep.
without taking into consideration the impact on the people. And they always take care of their people. I've worked for some wonderful companies. And with that size of a brand or organization, I've never had anybody else have that level in that large of an organization, that level of culture and family feel. And you really feel like I'm loyal to this brand because I am part of their family. And so they have something really special, but it is in every level of leadership, and just knowing that they won't make a decision unless they really assess the people impact. So I think they've done a beautiful job over the course of the last, 20 some years that I've seen. I think they've
Yeah.
evolved beautifully in terms of their transformation, and it's been focused on leadership and, focused on culture.
They have other programs that they are continually putting their field leaders through so that those people can grow and
Right.
become better personally, professionally. But it's not as if they just leave the person on their own. Is they're helping their professional development. And if you help the people, you help yourself, the organization, because the people are growing as well.
Outside of Estee, are there any other examples of companies that exhibit transformational leadership capabilities very well?
There's still pockets of that in Home Depot, in Target, in Nordstrom's, but it ties back to the leader of the region, of the district, to see where that's still living and breathing and where it's fallen by the wayside. Within an organization, you have functions that have really embraced a transformational leadership and soliciting input from their employees, where you might see the department over, maybe in credit and collections, not so much. It's like, we're telling you what to do. If you have feedback, that's great. We're going to survey you once a year and we'll read it. So it's existing in different functional areas, or particularly for retailers, because they're spread across the globe. If they have brick and mortar stores, you often find that they exist in their regions. You can, go to the Northeast region and then go to the Southeast region. And if they're being run by different regional managers, you can experience two different companies. It's fascinating, the little cultural incubators that happen when you're geographically dispersed.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, I saw that firsthand a lifetime ago when I was back with IBM Consulting, and I was doing a lot of restaurants, and in different parts of the
Yes,
country,
yeah.
Pittsburgh, their stores, their restaurants were operated totally different than like Minneapolis and that type, and it was just, and we saw it, I think, with another store operations project we did early in 2021, where the Florida stores and of course New York with different state laws operated, but you might as well have been in a different, from those two different geographies. So that's an interesting observation. And to some extent, those regional differences aren't going to go away, but I think the capabilities could be more consistent.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a paradox, right? Is so much of like retail and our environment, if you're out in the stores, it is about a consistent experience. And that means consistent policies and procedures. But yet now we're saying in order to, help transformational leaders grow, you need to adjust roles and responsibility to the individual. So you're kind of like, wait, can we have it both ways? It's like that really fine balance. And there is a middle ground, but finding it, I think our work as consultants coming in to work with clients, that's where the work is how can we maintain a sense of consistency, but still let independent thinking surface and be valued by the organization.
We've worked with JCPenney, and they have a new chief people officer, and he is very focused on ensuring that they change the culture of the organization, and it's a people first organization. So even our change management, where I was pleasantly pleased is that we were able to really focus on the leadership. And so our work was less about the change management tactics, and it was much more about how do we develop the leaders. And so we did some, self-awareness, self-assessments, things like that on transformational leadership. So the leaders were able to understand, what are their leadership styles? What are the strengths? How do they leverage those? Where are the risks? And as they're going through transformation, what are the things that they need? And so the company was really responsive to listening to those things. And we did a ton of task forces outside of this specific project, but really to talk about what's the workload exhaustion? Where is it coming from? How do we get better? And, so there was a lot of feedback and just being able to kind of condense that down, but they're taking steps to be able to, to change what that looks like. And I think that was a result of some of our efforts, but also just kind of the direction that they're going as well as an organization.
And in some of these projects, Carrie, I know you've used this transformational leadership self-assessment tool. Can you give us a little bit of background and explanation on how that's used and what the output of that is?
I'll just use JCPenney if I can, just as the example. But so we had this self-assessment, and it was really around transformational leadership. And it was a simple self-assessment, but similar to things that you've taken probably in the past, like Myers-Briggs or, Strength Finders, things like that. And so it really identifies kind of what type of transformational leadership style you demonstrate most. And then it highlights, like, these are the things that work really well when you're going through periods of transformation. And then it outlines also, like, these are the areas of risk. So these are the things you need to watch out for. We ended up going through the self-assessment, and then they shared their insights and what some of the things that they learned about themselves. But what was interesting is that the entire group was, for the most part, the same style. And so it gave some insight to that group and to their leaders that, hey, we might have some work to do to get a little more, kind of diversity in thinking styles. And we'll have to be careful because we've got so many people kind of in that same leadership, thinking pattern and doing kind of the same things. We are missing, like more of the inspiration and more of the motivation and some of those traits that, people do need when they're going through transformation. So we were able to kind of pull out for some of those leaders who did have some of those traits to say, okay, how do we leverage you differently? And whether it was within that project or if it was across multiple initiatives, we could identify, and they learned about themselves, but they also learned about each other. And it's something that they hadn't really done in the past. So it was a small little activity or exercise. But I think when you think about transformational leadership, it starts with having self-awareness. And that's why we started with that self-assessment first, because you can't transform others and an organization if you don't transform yourself. And so doing that self-assessment just to gain some awareness and put some new behaviors into practice became critical to their success of their initiatives.
One of my last questions was, how can a company get started? And it sounds like something like this transformational leadership self-assessment tool would be a good place to start. Just getting really curious about your internal leadership capabilities, that type of thing. Was that, in addition to that, first of all, is that right?
Yes, definitely. Well, yeah, contact us first. Yeah, for sure.
Good, bad, or ugly, you have to benchmark where the organization is. And then even if there's small wins, you'll see, if you're doing it properly, you should see an uptick in the assessment. And it has to be done, though, reassessed on a regular basis.
Right. Understanding where you are as a baseline first. I think also, we had kind of talked at the beginning, the difference between change management and transformation initiatives, like don't go in silos. So if you have a transformation, right, I see, transformation offices out there that don't include a people first approach. So they're creating a transformation office that's very focused on digital transformation, which affects everybody, every department, every role, like all these different things. But there's not a people, like change management practices, leadership, all of those things that are a part of that. So there's this beautiful strategy, but they're missing that. So I would also say, look at things holistically. Don't take things in silos, especially the people. Have a, focus on people and process. They need to go hand in hand. You can't separate those two. And then I would say the third, and I hear this all the time, especially leaders as they get higher and higher up, is they say there's never development for me. There's never development for me. So no matter what the level, what the role, like always invest time in leadership development. I mean, that's a big opportunity, I think, in most organizations. Everybody expects the leaders to just know how to do it. They get paid enough to do it, and there's not development for them. And, especially in the last couple of years, there's so many changes. They need the skills and the tools. Don't just assume that, whatever the leadership level is, that they have those tools to be able to, manage through the transformation. So invest in leaders.
It's interesting to think, as leaders ascend in the organization, who better to invest in? Those are the people that are setting strategy and that are really looking at the future of the company growth. I'm like, you want those people to be the best and the brightest and have like the most current knowledge and thought leadership. It's like, why would you let them sit and just be static and not continue to encourage their learning? I know a ton of people that do it themselves. And sometimes, though, you are so caught up in your like day job that you just can't get to it. So an organization that will set aside and let people have that time, I think, is imperative.
Yeah, so that's dedicating specific times and maybe even time frames. Like at this point in your career, or at this point within this company, every quarter or however, there needs to be X amount of time set aside for this leadership development.
Yeah.
So it's like what you said at the very beginning, instead of the transactional checking off the box. Okay, now I know how to do this work, this whatever task list, or a very transactional. Those still have to be done, and that's really super important. So the business continues to run. But then this is more investing in sharpening the saw on a leadership level.
Right.
But those that don't invest and deliberately invest time for their people in these capabilities are really going to be on the backside of this.
Right? Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, I think too, like, we're working on helping organizations. They can't do it all. So, we did our own, Change Academy for the Parker Avery firm for select consultants. And, we're working on being able to offer something to our clients too, that can be tailored to them and give them their own toolkit, so to speak, so they can be more effective and they can build those leadership skills. So more to come on that.
Thyself.
Stay tuned. Yeah. Absolutely.
There's organizations we work with, like right now, the client Carrie and I are working with, they have their fair share of problems and hurdles, but they also have a lot of strengths. They have an amazing group of middle managers and people that are willing to learn, willing to put the time in, go above and beyond. So when we're doing assessments, you can't just find the bad. There's good in every organization. It's just uncovering that and seeing how you can take that and counteract or offset the weaknesses.
Awesome. Ladies, thank you so much. As always, I love having you guys on the podcast. It's just like we're talking over coffee, like we want to be. I appreciate you taking the time to talk about transformational leadership, and we will get on the schedule the OCM Academy podcast, because I know that's going to be a big deal this year for sure.
Yes.
All right.
Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
That's a wrap for this episode of Talk Retail to Me. If you have questions related to today's topic, please visit our website at parkeravery.com to learn more and to contact us. Also, we'd love it if you shared Talk Retail to Me with any of your colleagues. It's streaming on all the major podcast platforms, and the videos are available on our YouTube channel. For more Parker Avery industry expertise and advice, be sure to follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.